Shabbat Shalom. If you joined us last Shabbat to honor Mark Heitlinger at one of the many tributes that he'll enjoy as he anticipates retirement, then you were present for this charming revelation. This Shabbat is the 64th anniversary of his bar mitzvah. And what's more, ever since that joyous day, he says that he has thought about his portion, Vayakhel Pikudei. You see, Vayakhel is about bringing the community in all of its variety together to create and construct a sacred space so that God would dwell among us. And Pikudei is all about the administrative functions thereafter. And here we are. Mark has been our administrator for the last 34 years. At that dinner, Mark spoke about the highlights of his career, which including the restoration of this sanctuary, which coincided with Emanu-El's 150th anniversary. As our informal historian and tour guide, Mark knows every inch of this temple and can speak about it without referring to a note. In fact, he is probably the only person who could calculate the height and the width of this sanctuary in cubits. That's biblical measurements. And no surprise, it was Mark who helped redesign the ark in its current configuration so that every Torah now has its place of pride. Before that, we had 5 Sifrei Torah squeezed into a single row. And when it came time to paint the ceiling, to restore its vibrant 1929 grandeur, Mark did that too. Yes, 10 stories above us. And our magnificent Fifth Avenue lobby reflects his own passion for Art Deco. And to think that the seed of his lifelong interest in temple administrative work, caring for our community and our sacred space, was planted over 6.5 decades ago. Dear Rabbi Posner was fond of saying, "Your parasha is your portion in life. Your drash is your destiny." Now, I used to think that it was just a quaint expression that he coined, but Mark's experience certainly bears that out. The lesson for us is simple. Who we are or become is often shaped in our earliest days. For those who are struggling or searching, for those who have lost their way, going back to our origin story is a way of anchoring our identity. I learned this very lesson in another context when I stood with a bereaved family as they buried their father. As his daughters comforted one another, they shared the most important life lesson their father imparted. From their earliest days, he had taught them, always remember who you are. And over the years, these words kept them grounded. For the daughter who had felt especially lost and uncertain of her place in the world after she divorced, her father's words reminded her of who she had been before her heartache, and that guidance gave her the courage to move ahead with her life. I walked away transformed by their father's wisdom, and ever since I've kept that expression in my rabbi's manual. It guides me every time I do a life cycle, whether it's welcoming a child, marking a bar or bat mitzvah, celebrating with a bride and groom, or at the graveside of a loved one. Remembering who you are is the essence of understanding our place in the world. What is true for people is also true for nations that have lost their way. Our hearts ache as we see what is happening now in Israel, as the current government tries to fast-track judicial reforms, pushing them through the Knesset, and their timeline is before Passover. As we have all come to understand, because Israel has no constitution, their Supreme Court is the only check on the legislative and executive branch. So a nation that has functioned for 75 years, relying on the integrity and the trustworthiness of its Knesset members, no longer functions as it should. There is so much at risk. You can see it, you can feel it, all reflected in the protests in the streets. What is clear is that this government does not have public support. Israelis are taking to the streets because they know that if and when the reforms are pushed through, they will be left with no accountability, and consequently, no democracy, and the civil rights that they count on will be trampled. Remember that Israel's origin story was born in response to fascism. On May 14th, 1948, David Ben-Gurion read these words found in Israel's Declaration of Independence. The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and the ingathering of exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all of its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace. We know those words from the prophets. Freedom, justice, and peace as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, of conscience, of language, of education, and culture. Every week, the streets continue to fill with people from every corner of society who are drawn together by these ideals, by Israel's origin story. At a recent rally, former Prime Minister Ehud Barak stated that citizens are obligated to resist an illegitimate government, noting, "We have a social contract about liberal democracy as defined in the Declaration of Independence." And he added in a more pointed way, anticipating a difficult future, "We don't have a social contract with a dictator." A fear that sounds rhetorical and dramatic, but the proposed judicial reforms indeed make that a possibility. Others register their objection in a more personal way. You'll recall that in 1976, Yoni Netanyahu, the prime minister's brother, became a national hero when he lost his life trying to rescue Israelis who had been taken hostage en route to France and diverted to Entebbe. 47 years later, The rest of Yoni's unit, who call themselves Team Amnon, wrote an open letter to Netanyahu. But they directed their protest to Netanyahu's heart and his own family history, trying to move him from Bibi the politician to Bibi the brother of a fallen soldier. Dear Bibi, they wrote, we were without protective vests and helmets because we had to dress up as Ugandan soldiers. But we took the risk because we had a goal to save 105 Jews, Ashkenazim, Mizrahim, secular, religious. They were all our people and citizens of our country. We shared a sense of mission and a sense of destiny, along with the memory of the Holocaust of our parents. And we carried the feeling that once again, for those hostages, it was as if the Germans had selected the Jews all over again. We had huge butterflies in our stomachs and fears because we knew very well that we might not come back. Bibi, they continued, we did the impossible together with brothers in arms, fighters from Golani, paratroopers, pilots, intelligence and medical personnel, Mossad, mechanics, and all the rest. Today, as then, we are all together, but this time in demonstrations. Whereas you, Bibi, are doing everything in your power to undo and disintegrate Israeli society. Together with brothers in arms and many other wonderful Israelis, we will continue to demonstrate and fight for the Israel of the Declaration of Independence and against dictatorship. There's a saying in Israel that the army is above politics. But at this fractious time in Israel's history, Team Amnon, Yoni's boys, wanted the prime minister to remember when Yoni sacrificed his very life to put the country and the welfare of its people ahead of his own interests. Their letter urged him to do the same. Remember who you are and who you could be again, they implored. During another recent demonstration of some 200,000 plus people, there were many politicians who rose to speak to the assembly, and each one commanded the interest of just a small group, just a small part of that community. Rather than political cohesion, what united this disparate body from every walk of life was a shared commitment to the founding vision they still cherish. Yair Lapid, leader of the opposition party, noted with some satisfaction, these protesters proudly wave the blue and white flag of Israel and quote our Declaration of Independence. It's not revolutionary songs they are singing, but our national anthem. Together, we will protect our democracy, our values, and protect ourselves from a government that has forgotten the basic democratic contract between citizen and government. The people who come each week to assemble in peace and raise their voices don't want to tear down, but build up. This is Israel's origin story. And when they forget it, we need to help them remember by speaking out for the values they identified as critical to their identity: complete equality, social and political rights for all inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex, guaranteed freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. As this Shabbat brings us back to the origins of the tabernacle, a teaching which inspired our friend Mark Heitlinger to a life of service, may we recall the fundamental principles which inspired prophets and set the foundation for Israel's vision of who it could become. If the Declaration of Independence is her portion, then the voices of the protesters are her drash. May all of Israel heed those words so that she will remember who she is and be moved to reach again toward her promise. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be so.